it doesn't mean to say that things are always there. I probably should have put, if I closed the door, he would have just been banging on it anyway, so.
We're getting cat bombing here.
Luckily, it's just, I hope I'm not disturbing this too much. He's not always this assertive. Lucky his sister didn't come into play. But it's not to say that things are always pleasant or always work out the way we want.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I've said many times that some of the best things that ever happened to me were not getting what I wanted at a given time. Sometimes things come along and clear things out.
Yeah.
In a way that is not what you would have wanted, but when you look back, it could be the best thing that ever happened to you.
Right.
I think sometimes people marry people like people in the family, and sometimes they don't. And there's another theory that you either become your father or your mother, and you marry the opposite. So the woman could become the father, not the mother. Do you know what I mean? Or, but again, for me, the fourth house in the chart and the rulership of the fourth house 10th house axis is the father-mother axis in the chart. Any planets in those sectors and the ruler of those sectors tell you about the family dynamics in the chart, in your chart, like how you were raised. The 7th house is who you marry. It's not it may not be who you're looking for. You may be looking for Venus, but you get the 7th house. Okay, so the 7th house, the 7th house, its ruler, and the aspects to it will tell you that what you end up with in a relationship. If the planets involved with the 4th house and the 7th house are the same, you're going to follow the family pattern in some way. If they're not, you're going to step out of that pattern. So the chart will tell you whether or not that's true. Okay, so sometimes it could be, but it may not be. Besides, I think that you marry somebody that your chart tells you you're going to marry rather than what the family was like, regardless. Because it's already in the chart before you grew up.
That is so true, because we looked, there's so many theories out there, and I want to bust that theory because they're like, well, you marry more like your father figure, and the daughter does that, and the son goes marry their mother, and if it's too much like your mother, then it's too taboo, but you want to marry something in between, so it's very vague.
I think I wouldn't even look at that. I would just look at the chart and say, what does it look like?
Yeah.
And what is the 7th house, the ruler of the 7th house, and all of the planets that aspect the ruler of the 7th house, or any planets in the 7th house. See, Venus is what you're looking for, but Venus may not be what you get.
It's true. It's true. It's the same thing as pay job as well.
And the difference, the 5th house is who you date.
Yeah,
and
romance.
The 7th house is who you marry.
Oh.
The person you date may not be the person you marry. What I mean is that do you know what I mean? Once you get married, it may not be the same kind of relationship.
Right.
And you see people that have a bad 5th house. I had a friend years ago. She lived with the guy she was involved with for a very long time, and then they finally decided to get married. And as long as they were living together, they never got along, but they never split up. Her 5th house was not in good shape. The 7th house was in much better shape. The minute they got married, the relationship completely changed, and then they got along. And I could give you all the psychological reasons for that, and they were there. But the point is, it showed in the chart.
So that's where the magic recipe really lies in is its birth chart, and it will show why you want to stay or you don't want to stay. And if you have some sort of like seventh house challenge or blockage, and we can talk about that, about marriage in the seventh house. For example, if you had Uranus going in there, I think you mentioned a little bit about it, there's a good possibility that things will break up. Or if you're single, it would be maybe you're more like a playmate or, a bachelor or a bachelorette.
Well, but the other thing can be that you have a relationship with somebody who travels a lot for work. You have a relationship with somebody who's not home a lot, or that, I think, or you have a relationship with somebody who is unpredictable, but you could see if you can live with that, then that's okay. See, I don't think it always means that you have to marry somebody who's going to cheat on you or not be there, although that may be true. But it can, it's like when I see that in that kind of thing, because that person wants freedom too. And I had a friend, and it was like, I'm laughing thinking about her chart, but she always had good relationships with people out of state. And the minute it was going to get beyond that, things got much more challenging.
Wow.
Do you see what you know what I mean? So some people, and I have actually a friend I was just talking to today, who's been in a stable relationship with somebody that she's not married to for a very long time, and now something happened and they have to, because of circumstances, they have to live together, and they're having a great deal of trouble getting along. Because she could always pick up and go, or the partner could always pick up and go. And as long as they had that option, they got along great. Now that they don't have that option, they're not getting along as well. So I'm not saying they shouldn't be together. I'm saying they need to bring back that option. Because who says that, people need to live together, stay together, and do everything conventional? If that's not what if you have the moon in Cancer, or you're a Taurus, or you know what I mean, you may want something different. But
that is totally hilarious when you're mentioning that, because neediness, when you need space versus it's very different. And if somebody who needs space, they can pick up and go, it's great, and they can come back and we have a relationship and it works for both parties. Why not?
Yeah, as long as it works for both people, there shouldn't be any right or wrong.
No, absolutely not. What about if you have somebody like a Neptune in the seventh house?
Neptune, I have to say I'm not a fan of Neptune. I think that Neptune is actually the hardest. Pluto is difficult to deal with for other people if you have a strong Pluto, but you may like it. But with Neptune, many times what you see is not what you get. And the tendency with Neptune can be either you over-idealize somebody, and you create this great romance. You want to get married or have a relationship and live happily ever after, which unfortunately is never true for anybody. Pardon my pessimism, or cynicism, I might say. But the reality is, any relationship is going to have its ups and downs, even the best. But with Neptune, you don't want to see anybody's faults. And so you can overlook a lot. And so that can mean you can get taken advantage of on one hand, if that's the way the other person is. On the other hand, it could be you can't accept somebody for being themselves. You can't accept somebody with their flaws. And so sometimes people with strong Neptunes are either, and let me just say this, I think that we can always learn something. But people with strong Neptunes can either be idealizing and looking at life or a situation or a person through rose-colored glasses, or it can be nobody's good enough because they don't meet the ideal. And so that's the kind of danger with Neptune. And the only time I don't usually try to tell people what to do. I usually try to lay out the information. The only time I tend to tell people what to do is when they have Neptune transiting the 7th house. Not when it's in the 7th house, but when it's like going back and forth, like over the cusp. I will tell them not to get married. Wait till this passes and see if you still feel the same way.
I think that's really reasonable.
Because I had one client who, she didn't, you know, people they're in love, they don't listen to you. But she has Neptune transiting the 7th. She had already been divorced once and was paying the first husband alimony. It goes both ways. And I could tell, you know, between his chart and her chart, and he was Neptunian, and I just said, you know, you're in your 40s, you're not going to have any more kids. He's got kids, you've got kids. You know, you're going to try to, why don't you just wait till the transit's over or just live together? She got married. When Neptune moved away, she called me. She didn't call me for a long time. Neptune moved away, she called me when they were getting divorced. Because that's when she saw him for what he was like. And again, I'm not saying he was a bad person or a good person, although I think he was not so wonderful. But but it was like she was blinded by the romance. And I remember when Neptune was squaring my son, it was a number of years ago, and I was dating somebody. And I thought, oh, he's so wonderful. And then Neptune, the transit would just get a little further away. You know, it was like it wouldn't be exact anymore. And I go, oh, maybe he's not so wonderful. And then it would retrograde back again. I go, oh, yes, he's that wonderful. But of course, when Neptune moved away, it was clear that he wasn't that wonderful. So, you know, even, you know, we as astrologers are not immune. You know, we may know what's there astrologically, but it doesn't mean we're not affected by it.
Wow, that is so great that you were sharing that story. And I think some people can relate to that, you know, or blinded by love. And that could be, you know, somebody could actually experience that right now. And you might need an astrologer to say, you know, put on the brakes, reset.
Wait to see if this is really what you're getting.
Right. You know, and that's so important. Sometimes we're so blinded from our life and see this, you know, rosy glasses that we were wearing, and we didn't realize that. And now we're kind of going through the rough patch, and that could be hard. That could be prevented, but you know, you have to make a decision. And as an astrologer, how you were mentioning, we can make a recommendation. We don't force you upon it, but if you make that choice to go against it, that's your free will right there to do as you please.
Well, people, you know, there is a certain amount of fate. There is that intersection between fate and free will. Like what we're like is fated. What we do with it is up to us. The cycles are fated. What we do with them is up to us. And sometimes not. Because sometimes things just do happen that we can't control.
And right. And sometimes that, like you were saying, like Uranus, it just forces us to push things out or move things in a certain way that we need to be in a certain path. And you were mentioning that about that. And I understand that, you know, we can make fun of Pluto all you want. I like to hear a little bit about your experience.
Pluto was very challenging. You know, Pluto went over my son in the 80s. And it was like, everything that I had sort of worked for, or everything that I wanted at that point in time had come when Saturn was on my son. So I said, okay, I worked hard. I deserved it. Everything came. You know, Pluto is my friend. It's my ruling planet. I was a baby astrologer. That was a long time ago. And astrology was still there, but other things in my life that my identity was in just disappeared. And I was completely miserable. And I felt like my life was, you know, like I might have fun again, but I would never be fun again. I mean, I felt like, you know, because with Pluto, you tend to feel like it's not just now, it's forever. And that was just the way it was. And there were things, there was nothing I could do about. And so that's the other side of it. There are times in your life where things go wrong and they are out of your control. It's the way I look at it with Pluto. If you lose your job under a Saturn transit, you probably weren't living up to expectations. Now, whether those expectations were reasonable or not may be a different question. You lose your job with Pluto, it's like the plant closed. Do you know what I mean? There was something that occurred that's just beyond your control. And so, there are times in life that are like that. I mean, I think what astrology helps us to understand the difference, sort of like what's normal for a given period of time.
Yeah, that is totally true. Like once that door is shut, you can plead it, you can beg it to open up. It's just, that's it. It's the door.
And sometimes you still mourn it for a while.
And it's true. I do definitely want to hear a little bit more on the seventh house, Pluto in the seventh house, how that's being affected in a person relationship, because it does affect our identity as well, because that's affecting our first house.
So are you talking about Pluto in the seventh house natally, or Pluto?
Natally. With
Pluto in the seventh house, you need to be careful that you don't give away your power in a relationship. And then depending on what the rest of the chart is like, that may be okay with you or it may not be. But sometimes people give away their power and then they have to fight to reclaim it, and that can be the end of the relationship. Like I have an Aries client with Pluto in the seventh house. And her husband had her out on the farm with the kids. He controlled the money. And eventually she was an Aries. Her problem was that she was an Aries with Pisces. So the Pisces was everything was wonderful and rosy, and the Aries was, I'm not going to let you control me. And so she was in the marriage, her Venus and Moon were in Aries. Were in Pisces. Actually, they still are. And her Sun and Mars were in Aries. And so she had this aggressive nature on one hand and a completely idealistic, romantic nature on the other hand. And she was playing out the Moon-Venus role for a long time in the marriage. She was the Pisces, she was the nurturing, she stayed home and took care of the kids. She was very loving. And then at one point, she just, her husband's control was like over the edge, and it was like things blew up. But she also chose him.
Wow, that's intense.
Well, some charts are also more intense than others.
I agree.
If she didn't have the Aries, she might have been comfortable for a very long period she might have stayed comfortable with the husband being the one in power. See, because what makes one person happy can make can drive another one over the edge. But again, most of the time, if something is too out of balance, some kind of transit or cycle will come along to wake us up.
Yeah, and we talked about that today, a little bit about that today. And, we always talk about scary Saturn. It's going to come to your seventh house. What is it going to do? Or if you have Saturn in the seventh house, what are you going to do? Like, how do you deal with a partner like that? Or even yourself?
Well, again, I actually don't have such a bad view of Saturn.
Why is that?
Well, because Saturn says you got to work. If you're willing to work, it shouldn't be such an issue. Now, I think Saturn in terms of creating barriers can be a problem. So think of Saturn as like structure. Okay, the structure can be, if it's a cold day, you're glad to have your walls and your ceilings and it's a protection. But barriers can also, the structure can also be a barrier that leaves things or people out. So people with Saturn need to learn that they're not with strong Saturns need to learn that they're not responsible for everything. And that, see, did you ever, I don't know, you're much younger than me, so you may not have heard this book, but there was a book called The Road Less Traveled that was on the bestsellers list for like 25 years. And he talked about people, everybody is either neurotic or has a character disorder. And people are one or the other, or sometimes people are a combination of both. But the way I look at it is people with strong Jupiters have the character disorder, and people with strong Saturns are neurotic. So the character disorder is, if something went wrong, it's not my Jupiter Venus people to a large degree. I'm the nice one, so if there's a problem, it must be you. It can't be my fault. I'm the good guy. You know, people with strong Saturns, it's all my fault, whether it is or not. So people with strong Saturns have to recognize what they're responsible for and what they're not, which can be a challenge. And they also have to learn to be careful, there goes the cat again, with creating barriers where there don't need to be any. But Saturn in the 7th house, you could marry somebody older, you could marry somebody more responsible, you could marry somebody who restricts you. You know, but again, a lot of this is also how is it aspected in the chart. And it can also be you that's like that. See, the 7th house is one of those funny houses because most of the time it's projected, but it's also your chart. And it's how you can be in relationships too, but you see it in the other person. So it can be both.
That is very dead on because you can see that. And that's where people say, well, I got to learn how to do boundaries. I need to stop self-blaming. Everything is not my fault. And again, that's Saturn is trying to put us in the hard work. If things were so easy, like Jupiter and Venus, it's just everything's pleasure, everything is idealist. We're living in la la land, and you know we can preach to whatever guru out there, and everything will be okay. But no, not necessarily. Saturn is there to put in the hard work so that you can overcome certain obstacle, and once you overcome it, meet the standard of Saturn, then things will sustain.
Well, Saturn, I'm not to say that Saturn can't be challenging, but it's usually challenges that you're capable of meeting. So if you have a Saturn transit, you may not be happy during something. And again, part of it depends on what sign you are and what your chart is like to begin with, because how we respond to transits or anything else depends on what our nature is. If you get a Capricorn with a Saturn transit, they're going to respond very differently than a Sagittarius.
That is so true.
So you have to look at, what's normal for the person.
Yes, that is true.
It doesn't mean to say that things are always there. I probably should have if I closed the door, he would have just been banging on it anyway. So
we're getting cat bombing here.
Luckily, his sister. I hope I'm not disturbing this too much. He's not always this assertive. Lucky his sister didn't come into play. It's not to say that things are always pleasant or always work out the way we want.
Yeah. But
sometimes I've said many times that some of the best things that ever happened to me were not getting what I wanted at a given time. Sometimes things come along and clear things out.
Yeah.
In a way that is not what you would have wanted, but when you look back, it could be the best thing that ever happened to you.
Right. And that's totally true. And that's when our Jupiter needs to come in and bless us that's what we had and what we experienced. And that's our knowledge.
And I actually, some things that I tell people when you have Pluto transits, Pluto requires like letting go. Start cleaning the house and throwing things out and getting rid of things. I mean, literally. Sometimes there are external things that we could do that help shift the internals.
I love that. No, it's totally true, because the minute you start decluttering.
Not that I'm good at that, but.
Well, I'm pretty good at that. And, I read the book, The Con Marie, which is all about decluttering and what brings you happiness and, what brings you joy, which is Jupiter. And that's what it is. It's structure and order. Saturn, that's going to help you. Or even Pluto, it's getting rid of stuff and letting go. And I want to talk about the happy Jupiter in the 7th house.
Well,
what's your take on this one?
Well, Jupiter, let me just say this. Jupiter brings abundance. It doesn't mean abundance is not always good. Do you know what I mean? Again, you got to look at how things are. You could have Jupiter in the 7th house and have a very generous, fun-loving spouse who spends all your money. The kind of spouse that you go out with all your friends and he picks up the check or she picks up the check, and then you wonder later where the mortgage payment's going to come from. So sometimes things that look good. I'm not saying Jupiter's bad. I don't mean it that way, but I think that Saturn gets a very bad rap, and Jupiter gets that's not as deserved, and Jupiter gets a good rap that's not as deserved. So Jupiter's opportunity and abundance, but bigger isn't always better. I mean, I have a friend with a Sun-Jupiter conjunction in the 8th house in Gemini, and she is extremely generous. And people die and leave her money. It's Jupiter conjunct in the 8th house. And she goes through it very quickly. That's the generosity. Just see what I mean? So it's great when the flow is coming in, but it may not always be so good when the flow is going out. Or after the flow is gone and there's not enough left.
And then you need to bring Saturn in to clean up the mess.
Well, that's when you get scared. That's when you get scared. But see, again, sometimes, I have a friend with Jupiter in the 2nd house. She makes money very easily, but she's never had any. Easy come, easy go.
Right. Because Jupiter's generous.
Right. But, generous is good when it's affordable.
Correct. And we live in a material world where things come consistently.
But do you know what I mean? And so every planet has its strength and its weakness. I mean, Uranus is the planet of disruption on one hand, but Uranus is the planet that looks at you, forces you to be true to yourself.
Right. It's totally true. And
as much as I trash Neptune, I want to come back to that, because you see Neptune strong in the charts of a lot of entrepreneurs, people who are visionaries. So it's not just artists. Bill Gates has Neptune opposing the moon. Steve Jobs had a strong Neptune, Pisces, was a Pisces. Do you know what I mean? And so there's the other side of Neptune, which can be visionary.
Right, because those are really important. If you don't have a vision,
right,
you don't have a motive.
But you have to have enough something else to make that vision a reality.
Right, otherwise you're living in la la land. And that's totally true. And, Joyce, I know that you are teaching some courses. I wanted to know if people want to find you, learn more about relationships, how to read a birth chart, understand a little bit more on that. Is that something that you're kind of doing this year?
Sure.
Where's that happening?
I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I have clients all over the world.
Great.
So I work with people, whether it's on Skype or the phone, that they're out of the area. Usually people in the Boston area come in, but anybody else. And I'd also like to put in a plug for the National Council for Geocosmic Research, which I happen to be the chair of and the president of the Boston chapter. We're an international organization with local chapters. And so we have, over 30 chapters in various parts of the United States. We have one in Thailand. We have one in Taiwan. We have 2 in Mexico. We have 1 in Turkey. And anybody who is interested in starting a chapter, actually, if there isn't already one in their area, is welcome to start one. The only requirement is that you have 3 meetings a year in person and that you have 10 members. But
Wow.
but NCGR also, we have very good publications. And so even if you don't have a local chapter to go to, it's worth it. And we do webinars from time to time. And we're one of the sponsoring organizations for this big astrology conference that's happening in Chicago this month, United Astrology Conference.
Wow.
So if anybody wants to find me,
yeah.
JoyceLevine.com. And the NCGR website is geocosmic.org.
Yeah, I noticed that not only you do conference, you're a speaker, you're also an author. I know that you have some things that helps out people with Pluto and Neptune and Saturn.
Yeah, I designed some meditation CDs. I used to, I'm not doing it anymore, but I used to teach a visualization class. And people would come to class and they go, oh, it's so easy to meditate in your class, but we go home and we can't do it. So I actually started, I found a harpist. We designed some music. Yeah, I know, I'm a perfectionist. Not in a neat and orderly way, unfortunately. But, and so there are 4 regular kind of meditation tapes, 1 on meditation, 1 on visualization, 1 on releasing anger and resentment, and 1 on contacting your guardian angel. And then I have 1 on each of the outer planet transits. So there's 1 on Pluto, 1 on Saturn, 1 on Neptune, 1 on Uranus, and 1 on Jupiter. And the idea of those is to help you to sort of integrate the energy of what's going on with those planets for you.
That is wonderful. So I will definitely leave all the link down below and under the description if you want to purchase or get a consultation with Joyce. I'll leave all the information down below. Joyce, I want to thank you so much. You're such a treasure. I think everybody here is dying to just get a hold of this knowledge and never heard of it. And if you're in the Massachusetts area, if you want to go see Joyce, you're there. She's in a couple conferences as well, teaching a few courses. And I think one of them is definitely in relationship. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not at the moment. We've kind of put courses aside for the summer.
Okay.
So I'll be starting things again in the fall.
Great. So if you want to learn a little bit more when she's going to be teaching next, you can contact her, or it's actually in her website as well. So Joyce, thank you so much for coming on, and it's such a great pleasure to connect with you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed myself.